Hey everyone, Lithium again. I'm going to try and do a bit of a live lesson here. It's about 4 minutes to market open at the start of the month here, 1st of September, so I should expect a little bit of volatility. Indexes, as you can see, they're pretty heavily down at the moment in the pre-market. Looking at about a gap down of 1% on the Nasdaq and 0.5% in the SPY and Dow Jones, sort of still heading a bit lower at the moment. But the strategy I'm going to be talking about is my personal favorite. It's these morning dip buys. I did very briefly go into it in one of my earlier videos, but I want to go into it in a bit more depth because it is essentially my favorite strategy, really. It's great because really you can only, well, really it allows you to focus on just sort of the first half an hour, right at the market open, first 30 minutes to 60 minutes, these plays happen. Then you can, ignore the rest of the day. You can lock in some profits or, well, hopefully lock in some profits and then move on, do other things for the day. You don't need to stare at charts all day, so that's why I really like this strategy. Anyway, it's got a few different names. There's the morning dip buy or the morning panic buy. Now, morning dip buy really is obviously just a much smaller dip. What causes it is you have these large percent volume gainers, which I have on the right here. So these are, things that have been up significantly in the after hours and pre-market. So they're looking to gap up pretty significantly. And the reason you have these morning dips is because of profit taking, essentially. So at the open, you often see the price dip down a bit as a lot of these people who have been holding these positions throughout the pre-market time, buying around here or whatever, they sell at the open. So you see a bit of a morning dip, and then often because there are these uptrending charts, you have a bounce. So what I'm generally looking for in these morning dip kind of plays is a dip. For a panic, I'm looking for a dip of at least 20%, because that allows me to follow a rule of halves, as I like to call it, which allows you to sort of lock in profit for half the amount that it dips by. So if it dips by 20%, for instance, you're looking for a bounce of about 10%. A lot of the time these do continue to bounce and actually go all the way to highs after their dips. Depending on how you want to risk manage them, the overall trend, a whole bunch of different factors is how much you might want to push it with these things. But personally, I like to be pretty conservative, take the most predictable part of the bounce, which is normally sort of like a 50% bounce from lows. The dip doesn't need to be so huge. As you can see here, I've got a bit of a support line drawn. And same as this one here. These are the sort of three main focuses I'm looking at today. This one obviously is a pretty significant dip if it was to get down here. I got my VWAP line here, so you can see that it's kind of respecting this VWAP, which is the volume weighted average price. So normally, general rule of thumb, if it's staying above this VWAP area, it's bullish. If it's staying below it, it's bearish. So chances are this one won't get much of a dip at the open. I'm expecting more of a morning spike instead. So normally if you have this kind of trend going above the VWAP, you end up with a morning spike instead of a sell-off. We're going to the open right now, so I'm going to try and focus up here and see if I can get a entry on one of these dips. So mostly focusing on HPCO. This is the one I was hoping to get the most significant dip towards the support area here. Keeping an eye on it to see if it comes down, but I'm going to flick through the others to see if there's any kind of morning action. As I expected, GFAI getting this morning spike because it was holding over VWAP, price pushing higher. So for these ones, a lot of the time you end up having to trade pre-market to actually get an entry at these because they are holding this VWAP. You can try and buy closest to the VWAP area. That's your dip instead, because a lot of the time these just morning spike and they don't actually give you a entry all the way down at these support areas here. Here we go now, getting a bit of a dip on HPCO. Looking for it to hopefully come down, sorry, a little bit lower. I'll be trying to enter personally, you know, between 720, 730, somewhere near this kind of support area where you see some bounce in the pre-market with some decent volume. Ideally even closest to the 7-hole number, because typically those 7-hole numbers act as stronger support. You can see over here on BGXX, we're also getting a bit of a morning sell-off. I'm going to bring this one up, potentially put it in order actually, because it's coming sort of down to the level I was hoping to get it at. So I put in an order here for 175, risking this 170 area where we had this nice bounce in the pre-market over here. Now, unfortunately, it's looking like this is the only dip that we got. So instead of going down to the full dollar, it just dipped to the $half. So those are the two main levels that you're looking for on these kind of charts, is the $half and the full dollar. Again, I like to be more conservative. You get a higher win rate, better risk reward. If these end up coming all the way down to, you know, a bigger dip means you have a, you know, better opportunity to dip buy these types of things, and that's what I'm looking for on these kind of places. A more significant dip buy opportunity for me to actually get in and, you know, hop onto something like this. Now, as you can see, this is still doing what I kind of predicted. You had this little morning dip as it was a bit of profit taking, and you're having this now significant bounce. Looks like I'm not going to get my entry on this guy either. It's had a bit of a bounce already. We'll see what happens with this one. And GFAI, as you can see, has continued to morning spike. We got a 10% spike, and now it's coming back down. Maybe I can get a entry closer to VWAP as it really starts to dip and panic. So as you can see here, this is why I like VWAP. It really often respects these levels. You got this nice bounce right off that VWAP level there. Okay, it looks like maybe I will get a fill here. I'm going to actually pull my order down a little bit. 173. Okay, and I'm in. So I'm just using this 170 area as a risk here. Not using a super wide risk, just because I'm hoping for a bounce off this support here. And I'll be cutting it if it goes below. Now, got to keep in mind, especially with these dip buys, a lot of the time, you know, 9 out of 10 stocks do follow the overall market trend. And right now the markets are still quite heavily down. We're getting a bit of a bounce, but still down over 1%. You know, the S&P and Dow Jones now down 0.75%. So I have got a little bit of a bounce now coming off this 170. So you like to see this sort of respecting my support line that I had drawn in here. So for me, I'll be looking to sell not a huge, probably only 5% because it didn't get much of a dip. Markets are very red, so going to be extra conservative on a play like this. Looking to sell hopefully in the 180s, early 180s towards this daily high of $2 up here. You can see GFAI actually had a pretty big dip now. It's gone through VWAP and heading down more. If this panics more, so panic, we're looking, like I mentioned, is over 20%, which is we're already getting pretty close to. That's when you can start thinking about getting a bit more aggressive, especially if it comes down to a key support level. I'm not buying this just yet because it's sort of in open air at the moment. There isn't really anything telling me that this is the bottom of this particular stock, so waiting for it to panic down a bit more and just focusing on the play that I have made over here, which is BGXX, as I mentioned. Getting a bit more of a significant bounce of this 1.70 area as I expected here. I'm not going to be overly greedy on this one, like I mentioned. Happy to just lock in, 5% if I can get it on a play like this. So just as you can see, it's sort of starting to struggle a little bit in this area. I'm trying to be patient. Get that one, into the 180s. Hopefully, sort of somewhere near the top of this wick, 183 perhaps. I'll try and get out. Seems like a decent level for me. And there we go. Pretty straightforward, as you can see. Give me a second here. All right, so that's basically it. Out, and we got this nice little bounce. Took the profit off into the predictable part of the bounce, as I mentioned, and that's really all you're looking for in these morning dip plays. It's very straightforward. You've got this little morning spike followed by the morning sell-off. Managed to hit a pretty nice bounce off this support level, bounce back up, and then sell into the strength. Like I mentioned, always lock in profits. You don't need to hold through this chop. You're looking at the first parts of the day to focus on, really. You don't need to get overly aggressive. You don't need to try and aim for all-time highs. You just take the predictable part of the move. These 5% gains, they add up because they're very easy to make on these morning dip buys. This is my favorite play. Like, it's been 10 minutes into the open now. I locked in some pretty solid gains, and I don't really need to do anything else here. I can look at these other plays that I missed out on. So you can see that HPCO has really skyrocketed off this little tiny dip here to the $0.50. $0.50 are pretty good levels to be using too, so I probably should have been thinking about this $0.50 area a little bit more, but it wasn't enough of a dip for me to be interested. I like to see a bit more of a dip, a bit closer to a support level. It's all about risk reward for me, so I didn't get an entry on this one, but you can see that I got a really nice bounce on this little sell-off here. GFAI, you can see on this panic here, it has gotten a pretty significant bounce, so all the way down to 0.4 here from 0.48, so it's more than 20%, and then we have had this 10% bounce. So as I said, like down 20%, up 10%. You've got this pretty typical rule of halves that you can just follow on a lot of these dips, especially in the morning. So this is very easy strategy that you can focus on, these morning panic and morning dip buys. You don't need to overcomplicate it, just find some basic supports. The bigger the dip, the more aggressive you can be a lot of the time, because if it happens nice and fast, you often get a faster bounce. So just make sure that you're ready, because a lot of the time the bounces do happen fast and you want to get your orders in as close to the bottoms as possible. You want to be risking down where you can, So just try and get as close to some kind of support level, whether it's a VWAP, whether it's whole dollar, half dollar. You can see, where it kind of bounced off was closer to this 0.4 area, which is, the whole cent, similar to, in these sub-dollar stocks. You're not looking at the half dollar and whole dollar so much. I mean, obviously for resistance, you can look at the full half dollar, but any of the round numbers is generally where you're looking for a more significant support level to show up or resistance level to show up. So that's pretty much it for this video. Really, it's very simple. It's not a complicated strategy. All you're looking for is these dips and bounces. Always focus on the top % winners for these plays, because you are looking for things that are already up significantly in the pre-market, things that are gapping up, where there's already a lot of volume, a lot of buyers interested, so that when you do see these sell-offs, you often see people rebuying back into these positions, causing these bounces. So pretty straightforward. If you have any questions, feel free to message me about it. I can probably go into some more detail at some point, but it's pretty straightforward, honestly. It's not a complicated strategy, and that's why I like it so much. Keep it simple. Focus on these big % winners like I've talked about, and try and catch the meat of these bounces, and just focus on that, because as you can see, as this has done this little 10% bounce here from the bottom, he's starting to curl over again and just head back towards the lows. You've got to think of these as, a bouncing ball a lot of the time. When you have these first dips and bounces, a lot of the time each bounce gets smaller and smaller and smaller. So if it touches this level again, don't be thinking that it's going to bounce, extra high again. A lot of the time, if these curl down and come back to the come back to the lows, think of it as 50% of from this level instead of from this level. So maybe you get a tiny bounce from here, and then as it gets weaker and weaker, a lot of the time it just falls through, and then this support becomes resistance, and that's the end of that stock. So I've got to be careful with these, of course, but yeah, I hope this made some sense to all of you, and good luck with this one.